The envelope had been sitting in my coat pocket for 11 days before I finally opened it. I kept telling myself I was waiting for the right moment, but the truth is I was scared of what was inside. My grandmother had pressed it into my hands at my own rehearsal dinner, grabbed my wrist so hard I felt her rings dig into my skin, and whispered, "Don't let your brother see this. Don't let anyone see this." "Not yet." Then she let go, smoothed my hair back like she used to do when I was 7, and walked back to her seat like nothing had happened. She died 4 days later. A stroke set in her sleep. They said she didn't feel anything. I don't know if I believe that. The envelope was cream-colored, thick, the kind that costs more than regular stationery. My name was written on the front in her handwriting, not shaky, the way it had gotten toward the end, but firm, deliberate, like she'd been saving her strength for it. Inside was a single key on a small metal ring and a handwritten note that said, "Hillcrest Storage, Unit 14. The combination for the lock is your birthday. You'll know what to do." I didn't know what to do. That was the problem. My name is Tessa. I was 31 years old, recently married to a man named Callum, working as a physical therapist at a clinic in Raleigh, North Carolina. My grandmother, everyone called her Gram, had raised me from the time I was 9 years old, after my mother left and my father made it clear he wasn't interested in the job. I grew up in her house, ate at her table, learned how to parallel park in her parking lot, cried on her couch after my first real heartbreak. She was the most organized, careful, intentional person I have ever known. She did not do things without reason. My brother Holden was 4 years older than me. He was charming in the way that some men are charming. Effortlessly, selectively, in ways that made you feel lucky to be in the room with him. He'd always been Graham's favorite. Or at least that's what he told people. He said it so often and so casually that it became a kind of ambient fact, like weather. At family dinners, he'd mention offhand that Graham had promised him the house someday, or that she told him he was the responsible one. I never pushed back on it. I didn't see the point. What I know now is that I should have been paying closer attention. The rehearsal dinner had been at a restaurant downtown. Graham's choice, she insisted on paying for it, which in hindsight I understand differently now. She sat at the end of the table and she was quieter than usual, watching. Holden was across from her, doing most of the talking, telling a story about a fishing trip that I'd heard 3 times before. His wife laughed at all the right moments. I remember thinking that Graham looked tired. I assumed it was her age. She was 78. When she grabbed my wrist and pressed the envelope into my hand, I thought she was maybe having one of her sentimental moments. She did that sometimes, unexpected gestures, things that felt larger than the occasion. I tucked it into my coat pocket and forgot about it until the next morning. Then she was gone, and Holden moved very, very fast. Within 2 weeks of her funeral, he had contacted the estate attorney. Within 3 weeks, he had drafted a timeline of what he believed she owned and what it was worth. He sent me a spreadsheet, I'm not exaggerating, an actual spreadsheet with columns labeled asset, estimated value, and proposed distribution. His proposed distribution gave him the house, the investment accounts, and a storage unit outside of town. It gave me her jewelry and a savings account with about $40,000 in it. He called me while Callum and I were eating dinner. "I just want to be practical about this," he said. Graham would have wanted it handled cleanly. "I haven't even been to her house yet," I said. "I know, but the longer we wait, the more complicated things get. I've already talked to the attorney." Something tightened in my chest. "You talked to the attorney without me?" "Just preliminary stuff, just to understand the lay of the land." He paused. "Tessa, I love you. I'm trying to make this easier." After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Callum didn't say anything. He just refilled my water glass and sat back down across from me, and I was grateful he didn't try to fix it. That night, I found the envelope in my winter coat. I'd forgotten it was there. I sat on the edge of the bed and I read her note 3 times. And then I looked at the key for a long time. And then I put everything back inside and set it on my nightstand where I could see it. I drove to Hillcrest Storage on a Tuesday morning, alone. I didn't tell Holden. I didn't tell anyone except Callum, and he offered to come with me, but I wanted to do this part by myself. I'm not sure why. Maybe because she'd told me not to let anyone see it, and even though she was gone, I felt like the rules still applied. Unit 14 was in the back row of the facility, one of the larger ones. The combination lock opened on the first try, my birthday. Just like she'd said. The door rolled up with that hollow metallic sound that storage units make, and I stood there in the gray morning light trying to understand what I was looking at. It was organized. Of course it was organized. This was my grandmother. There were filing boxes labeled by year going back to 1987. A fireproof safe in the corner. 2 wooden crates sealed with packing tape. And on top of one of the filing boxes, weighed down by a small river stone, was another envelope. This one said, "For Tessa. Open first. Read everything before you call anyone." I sat down on the concrete floor and I read it. It took me about 40 minutes to get through everything she'd left in that envelope. There were pages of her handwriting, careful, dense, explaining things she'd apparently been wanting to say for years. And there were documents. Quite a few documents. The first thing I learned was that my grandmother had established a revocable living trust in 2009. I was the sole beneficiary. Not Holden, me. The second thing I learned was why. She wrote it plainly, the way she did everything. Over the course of roughly 6 years, Holden had borrowed money from her, not small amounts. The first loan was $18,000 in 2014, supposedly for a business opportunity that fell through. Then $30,000 in 2016 for a down payment on a property he later sold at a loss. That amount she tracked in a ledger, $5,000 here, $8,500 there, for reasons that got increasingly vague. He always said he'd pay her back. He never did. She didn't write it with anger. That was the thing that undid me. She wrote it like a woman who had accepted something painful and decided to stop pretending it wasn't true. She wrote, "I love your brother. I will always love him. But I have watched him take from people his whole life, and I enabled it for too long. What I'm leaving you is not a punishment for him. It's a correction. It's making right what I should have made right years ago." The trust, she explained, had been structured so that it transferred to me automatically upon her death. No probate. No court involvement. The estate attorney Holden had already contacted her attorney, knew about the trust and had been instructed on how to proceed. The house was mine. The investment accounts were mine. The storage unit was mine. Total value, as of the last statement she'd included, a little over $890,000. I sat on that concrete floor for a long time after I finished reading. I didn't cry, which surprised me. I just felt very still, like the air in the unit had gotten heavier. On the drive home, I called the attorney whose number was in Graham's letter. Her name was Miss Topardo Aldridge, and she answered on the second ring like she'd been expecting me. She said, "Tessa, I'm so sorry for your loss. Your grandmother spoke about you often." She confirmed everything the letter had said. The trust had already transferred. The paperwork was complete. She was ready to meet whenever I was. "Has my brother contacted you?" I asked. A brief pause. "He has." "What did you tell him?" "I told him that I represented the estate and that things were being handled according to your grandmother's instructions." "Does he know about the trust?" "Not yet," she said. "That was also your grandmother's instruction. She wanted you to know first." I thanked her and hung up. I want to be honest here. Part of me wanted to just let Ms. Aldridge handle everything. Send a letter. Make it clinical. Avoid the conversation entirely. I'm a conflict avoider by nature. Callum would tell you that, and he'd be right. I apologize for things that aren't my fault. I over-explain. I have spent most of my adult life trying not to take up too much space, but there was something about the spreadsheet Holden had sent me. The columns, the neat font, proposed distribution. He had already divided her life into rows and decided what was his before she was even in the ground, and he had done it without asking me. and he had already called her attorney, and I kept thinking about how fast he had moved, how practiced it all felt, and I thought, he has done this before. He did this to her, over and over, and she let him, and now he thinks he's going to do it to me. I told Callum everything that night. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about him. When I finished, he said, "What do you want to do?" "I want to handle it right," I said. "I don't want to be cruel. But I'm not going to let him take things that aren't his." Callum nodded. "Then let's make sure he can't." Ms. Aldridge and I met the following Monday. She walked me through everything in careful detail: the trust documents, the asset transfer, the accounts. She also told me something I hadn't known. Graham had documented every loan she'd given Holden over the years, every amount, every date, every verbal promise he'd made to repay her. Ms. Aldridge had copies of texts and emails. Graham had been thorough. She'd been building a record. She wasn't planning to pursue it legally, Miss Aldridge said. She just wanted there to be a record. She wanted someone to know. She wanted me to know, I said. Yes. I spent 2 weeks doing nothing visible. Holden called twice to follow up on the spreadsheet. I told him I was still processing things, still grieving, which was true. I didn't tell him I'd been to the storage unit, didn't mention Ms. Aldridge, didn't say anything about the trust. He was patient in the way that people are patient when they believe they've already won. In the meantime, I went through everything in Unit 14. I found things I hadn't known existed. A photo album from my grandmother's first decade in the U.S. after she'd immigrated from England in her 20s. Letters from my grandfather. A journal she'd kept sporadically from 1975 to 1991. And in the fireproof safe brokerage statements, property deeds, the trust documents themselves, and a cashier's check made out in my name for $12,000, money she'd set aside separately. She wrote in a note attached, so that I'd have liquid cash immediately without needing to wait for anything to process. I sat with that check for a long time. $12,000, set aside specifically so I wouldn't feel strapped. She had thought of everything. She had been trying to take care of me from wherever she was going, all the way to the end. The situation with Holden came to a head on a Saturday afternoon. He called and said he'd been doing more research on the estate and wanted to get together to talk, that he'd found some things he thought I should know about. He said it in that particular tone, warm, slightly condescending, that I recognized from our whole lives together. He'd used it when he explained to me why I was wrong about things. He used it when he was about to manage me. "Sure," I said. "Come over Sunday." Hallam and I spent Saturday evening going through everything one more time. Ms. Aldridge had given me clean copies of all the key documents. I organized them in a folder. I made a list of what I wanted to say and what I didn't need to say. Callum asked if I wanted him in the room. I thought about it. "Yeah," I said. "I do." Holden arrived Sunday afternoon with his wife. They brought pastries from a bakery we both grew up going to, which felt like something he'd planned. We sat at the kitchen table and his wife poured coffee and Holden launched into what he'd prepared. He'd found an old deed, he said, that he believed was in their grandmother's name but might complicate the estate. He thought they should get a second attorney, a neutral party. He wanted to make sure everything was handled fairly, that no one got taken advantage of. "I found out about the living trust," I said. He stopped. "I met with Ms. Aldridge. I've been through the storage unit. I know about the trust, and I know about the loans." The room got very quiet. His wife looked at him. He looked at me. "Tessa, she documented everything, Holden. Every amount you borrowed, every date, the texts where you said you'd pay her back." I kept my voice level. I had rehearsed this. "I'm not going to come after you for any of it. That was between you and her, and she made her decision about it. But I need you to understand that I know, and Ms. Mintz. Aldridge knows, and the trust is already in my name." He sat back in his chair. Something moved across his face. The charm dropped, just for a second, just a flicker. And underneath it was something much simpler and much older. He looked, just briefly, like a kid who'd been caught. "She cut me out," he said finally. His voice had changed, flatter. "She left you out of the trust," I said. "There's a difference." "That's the same thing." No, I said. It's not. Cutting you out is malicious. What she did was decide, after years of watching you borrow money you never returned, that she was going to leave her estate to me. That's her right. She loved you. Her letter says so. But she was also tired, and she was honest about what you'd done, and she made a choice. He didn't say anything for a long time. His wife was very still. The house, he said, is mine. The investment accounts. Mine. It's all documented. Ms. Aldridge has everything. If you want to contest the trust, you have that option, but Ms. Aldridge told me it was structured carefully and she doesn't believe a contest would succeed. I watched him understand that it was over. Not instantly. There were a few more minutes of conversation, some of it tense, some of it him asking questions I answered as plainly as I could. But the moment had already happened, right there at my kitchen table with the pastries he brought going untouched between us. The calculation that had been running behind his eyes for weeks, the spreadsheet, the proposed distribution, all of it had come up with a different result than he'd expected. They left an hour later. His wife hugged me on the way out, which surprised me. She held on a second longer than was strictly necessary, and I didn't know what to make of it, and I still don't. After the door closed, Callum and I stood in the kitchen and didn't say anything for a while. Then he put his arms around me and I let myself cry, which I hadn't done yet. Not really, not since the phone call that told me she was gone. I cried for the grandmother who had spent the last years of her life quietly building me a safety net while her son asked her for money she'd never see again. I cried because I hadn't known, and because she hadn't told me. And because she'd figured out how to tell me anyway, in her own way, on her own schedule, just like she'd done everything. The estate transferred without a legal challenge. Holden hired an attorney briefly, but the attorney apparently told him the same thing Miss Aldridge had told me because nothing ever came of it. We have barely spoken since. His wife texted me once a few months later to say she was sorry for how things went and that she hoped we could still be family someday. I saved the message. I haven't responded yet. I didn't sell the house. I couldn't. I go there on weekends sometimes, Callum and I sit in her kitchen and drink coffee from her mugs and look out the window at the backyard where she used to grow tomatoes that never quite came in right, and I feel her there in the most ordinary way possible. In the way a house holds the shape of the person who lived in it. The storage unit took me 3 months to go through completely. Every box, every folder, every photograph. I found a birthday card she'd written to me when I turned 16, that she'd apparently never mailed. I don't know why she kept it, and inside it she'd written, "You are more capable than you know. I hope someday you get the chance to prove it to yourself." I think about that a lot. There's one more thing. In the very last box in the unit, at the bottom, wrapped in brown paper and taped shut, I found a small framed photograph of the two of us. I may be 5 years old in it, before everything, before my mother left, before my father checked out, before I knew what any of that meant. I'm sitting on her lap in the backyard, and I'm laughing at something out of frame, and she's looking at me with an expression I didn't know how to name when I first found it. I know what it is now. It's the face of someone who has already decided. She decided a long time ago. She just needed me to be ready. I keep coming back to that image of my grandmother sitting at the rehearsal dinner, quieter than usual, watching. She knew she didn't have much time. She knew what Holden had been doing for years, and instead of confronting it loudly, instead of making a scene or demanding repayment or cutting him off with a phone call, she spent years quietly building something that couldn't be undone. A trust, a storage unit, a key with my birthday as the combination. She chose integrity, not because anyone was watching, not because it was easy, but because she believed that what's right eventually has to be made right, even if you have to do it yourself from beyond the door. I think about the choices she made when no one was looking. Every time she loaned Holden money she suspected she'd never see again, she could have looked away, told herself it wasn't that bad, kept the peace. Instead, she documented it. Dates, amounts, text messages, not out of bitterness. Her letter made that clear. But because she understood that truth without evidence, is just a feeling, and feelings can be argued away. She was smarter than anyone gave her credit for, including me, especially me. And I think about my own choices in those weeks after she died. The easy thing, the thing I almost did, was to accept Holden's spreadsheet and walk away. $40,000 and her jewelry wasn't nothing. It would have been enough to avoid the hard conversation, avoid the tension, avoid becoming the kind of woman who sits across from her brother and says, "That's mine." I almost let conflict avoidance masquerade as grace, but there's a difference between being gracious and being complicit, and my grandmother had spent 6 years learning that difference the hard way so I wouldn't have to. What I had to find in myself wasn't anger. It was steadiness, the ability to sit at that kitchen table with the pastries going cold between us and stay calm while saying difficult, true things. That's not something that comes naturally to me. I had to choose it deliberately, the way you choose to hold a door open against the wind. It takes more effort than people think, and it doesn't feel heroic in the moment. It just feels like not flinching. Here's what I believe now. Having lived through it, the way things unfold is rarely random. Holden spent years treating generosity like a resource to extract, and it eventually ran out. Not as punishment, just as consequence. My grandmother spent years doing the careful, unglamorous work of protecting what she'd built, and it held. I spent years being smaller than I needed to be, and when the moment came that required me to be otherwise, I almost missed it. Almost. The key she pressed into my hand wasn't just about money or property. It was an invitation to step into a version of myself she'd apparently already believed in. The note she left, the documents she organized, the cashier's check so I'd have breathing room, none of that happens by accident. It happens because someone decided, quietly and without applause, to do the right thing with everything they had left. I'm still learning how to be that kind of person, but I know what it looks like now. I saw it in a storage unit in Raleigh, in boxes labeled by year, in a river stone holding down an envelope addressed to me. She decided a long time ago. I just had to be ready to find it.